Hey, Grimmy here, and today we're going to be doing something that we haven't actually done on the channel. I guess we kind of have, it's just that I'm changing the style, the execution of it. I'm going to be talking about who's better, Gogeta, or I guess Super Gogeta who transforms into Gogeta Blue, or Broly who transforms into his full power Super Saiyan version. I do want to make this more of a series, and so this is something that I really want to do for like Gohan, Beast, and Gamma 1 and 2, so it's only right that I start off with the Part 1 characters first. Part 1 of the 9th anniversary of Dokkan Battle, that is. So I'll be discussing their kits very shortly, and then after the fact, I'll make like a kind of comparison. So we're not just going to be talking about the character's value in the fight, but the value as in like in the meta of the game. And I'll explain what I'm talking about later down the line. Let's not waste any more time and just start off with Gogeta. First of all, his leader skill. I do like that it's very straightforward, 200% to everything for movie heroes and Key Plus 3. It's just very easy to understand. It makes it really easy to kind of build a team around the character, and it's not that complicated, and all of the characters who are included in the character's leader skill, all of them get the full 200%, which I do like. In terms of the super attack effect, I think one thing to highlight is the defense stacking on the ultra super attack, because the character's transformation condition isn't that bad, and so when you're staying in with this Gogeta, who's also guarding for most of the turns that this character is in the fight, they're going to be stacking defense along with it, because it's really easy to get key, and you can see that on the passive, right? Because he gets the base key, and then 154% to both attack and defense, attacks effective against all types, and just the basic effects that you normally see in a summonable LR, the kind of buffs that you get when performing a super attack or when reaching a certain key threshold, and on top of that, he guards all attacks for 3 turns from the start of the entry turn, of this character's entry turn, and Rainbow Orb changing as well, so there's definitely value to the character there, because Rainbow Orb changing is really strong, and his passive synergizes with it because he gets more key when getting Rainbow Key Spheres. Now, in terms of the transformation, I think a lot of people really dislike this condition. Can be activated starting from the 4th turn from the character's entry turn, which sucks, because if you get Gogeta in slot 1, then yeah, it is actually pretty good. It's equal to the 7th anniversary LRs, but if you get him on like slot 7, then the fastest that you can get Gogeta to transform by floating him off would be on turn 7, which is horrible, because a lot of the fights nowadays just kind of end faster. By then, you'd already be almost dead, right? And I guess a lot of characters do work together. A lot of characters nowadays share a bad transformation condition, and so there's synergy there, where they're basically going to ramp up together at the same time. But obviously, we don't want characters to suck at the beginning of the fight. It is obviously something that needs to be avoided, because more and more bosses are actually capable of dealing a lot of damage at the start, and are generally about to lose or about to completely annihilate you by the time you're reaching anything above turn 5. And that's not just with like rainbow characters, that's also including like 55%. Even if you being, me, like for example, having weaker characters with like not a full hidden potential, like no routes unlocked, it's still going to go pretty fast, and we won't be able to see too much of Gogeta by then. But, transformation condition out of the way, let's talk about the transformed version of this Gogeta, which I do like, and I think it is very much worth talking about. First of all, the super attack effect. I do like the change in super attack effect, because here the character obviously performs a lot of additional attacks. That's something to take note. And so the 12 key super attack buffing attack and defense for 1 turn definitely synergizes with that. So if it's that easy to land additional super attacks, then obviously stacking for 1 turn is not going to be a problem. And if you want to tank for, like in slot 1, without the character's taunt ability, you can still use the ultra super attack, because, actually, no, never mind. I thought this raised defense, it raises attack. So obviously you don't want to put this character in slot 1 unless you're popping the taunt, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, this attack raise, the ability to raise attack, the character's ability to raise attack definitely does help. It is a point that I kind of looked over there, sorry. Raising attack is obviously really good, because the character is going to be only increasing attack for that one turn if you're just relying on the 12 key. So having the 18 key increase that attack additionally for you, it definitely does help. And because it's for 4 turns, you can get at least a maximum of 2 stacks of this effect when you're popping like everything else in any given turn, right? But looking at the passive, it's even crazier, because it recovers 54% of HP at the start of the character's attacking turn for 4 turns, which means that this effect will activate at least twice. Exactly twice, actually. And nothing more, nothing less. Obviously, if the match ends before the second activation, then it's only going to activate once. But gets additional key, that's a 3 now, and then he also gets an additional 200% attack and defense. Attacks effective against all types, and then, you know, like the basic stuff, obviously, like I said before, in regards to your average summonable LR. But I think there is definitely a greater emphasis on not just performing additional super attacks, but also evading for this character. The Rainbow Orb changing also stays even after transformation, and the evasion is definitely pretty strong. And now the additional part of the passive that is he also covers crit chance. Now he has a greater chance of performing a critical attack, which is really good, I guess. It helps the character to be more of an all-rounder, at least defensively, right, when dodging. And then he also has the ability to counter, and that synergizes really well with the character's active skill. How long do you think you can keep up with me? Which is a pretty long name for an active skill. And can be activated starting from the next attacking turn, so when you transform, the next turn you'll be able to pop the active skill, which is a really good condition, considering how, I guess, kind of bad the transformation condition is. It's once you pop the transformation, the active skill would just be freely accessible after the fact, after the turn, when this Gogeta comes back after transforming. And it not only attacks the enemy and does a pretty solid amount of damage, he also taunts the enemy and evades all enemy attacks, which is really good, because nowadays I think bosses are becoming stronger and stronger, so having that ability to dodge attacks and not need to take them head on is really good, even if there are bosses that nullify dodge. And by then you could rely on Tech UI's domain whenever that's going to release, right? But by the time Tech UI Goku releases, Gogeta will obviously increase in value because he'll be able to evade a lot easier. But moving on to Broly now. Broly is definitely like very contrasting when you compare him to Gogeta. In terms of raw damage, he definitely takes the cake, especially if you compare him directly to Gogeta. And we'll talk about that. We'll get into greater detail right now. The leader skill. It's not like Gogeta's, it's actually the other 200% version, the other version of a 200% lead, where you get 170% for a specific category and an additional 30% if you fulfill an extra condition. Which is obviously, I guess it increases the flexibility when you're building a team, but it obviously does get a bit annoying to look for characters when you're trying to build a team for the character. Especially if you're trying to make, like, let's say for example, a super bosses team that unfortunately doesn't include characters on Exploding Rage or movie bosses. It means that you're only getting 170% and not necessarily getting that full value that you normally be getting from a basic 200% lead that just gives out the stats flat out. Talking about the super attack effects, we obviously have this raises attack, which is really good because Broly relies on doing damage, and so being able to stack attack before transforming is definitely a pretty solid ability. Even if Broly's transformation ability sucks, at least the super attack effect does help buff his damage. And for the ultra super attack, I think it definitely holds value as well, because not only does it greatly raise attack, and so that means he's stacking attack even more, but it's also raising defense greatly for 4 turns, which means that you can get a maximum of 2 stacks of this effect, where you get an additional amount of defense. And I don't think necessarily it's capable of tanking like insanely powerful super attacks, but you could at least be able to withstand normal attacks from really strong bosses to a decent degree. Talking about the passive of the character, there's definitely a large emphasis on getting ki, because not only does he have an intro that gives him 5 ki, which is insane, and an additional super attack. There is obviously a lot of emphasis on additional super attacks as well. This character doesn't have any active skill after transforming, so Broly's damage comes purely from doing damage, repeated super attacks, basically. just spamming super attacks over and over and over again. This is basically what Broly does, and each super attack does like a brick ton of damage. There is definitely, if you take a look here, that he gets like an additional super attack here, and as the second attacker in the turn, additional super attack, and that's essentially where the character comes in. So let's talk about the transformation condition next, and it's horrible. It's even more bad, it's even worse than Gogeta's, right? Because it's activated starting from the 5th turn from the character's entry turn, which is even worse than Gogeta's. If you get him in slot 1, then you can obviously keep him on rotation, and the second time he comes around after the fact, you'll be able to pop the transformation right there. But if you are really unlucky and you get Broly in slot 7, then the fastest that you're going to be able to get him to transform is turn 8. And like I discussed before, having a requirement to be on that turn, it just doesn't really work for the transformation. A lot of times people don't even get the chance to see this Broly unless, you know, obviously you get lucky and he shows up very, very early on in the fight. Now with his transformation comes a domain, and I don't really like domains myself, especially in this pre-domain update era where you can't stack them on top of each other. It is definitely, it makes the fight a lot more convoluted, I guess. Because one thing about domains is that it increases the strength of both your characters and the enemy and the boss as well. And so a lot of times when you're facing strong bosses, if you buff the already strong bosses, they're gonna become even stronger, obviously. And that in turn, it'll cause you to have a harder time winning the fight. So here you can see that it buffs extreme class enemies and allies attack and defense plus 10%, which is actually decent, because a lot of times when you're doing extreme class missions, you're not going up against another extreme class character, even though that's not always the case. But on top of that, he has like this additional piece of text that just screws him over, in my opinion. Additional attack and defense plus 10% for characters who are also on Exploding Rage or movie bosses. And movie bosses isn't too bad. You obviously have characters like Cell Max. We don't really talk about him. Terrifying, obviously. You're buffing Cell Max by like 20% in terms of both attack and defense. That's horrible. But in any other situation, it would actually be pretty good to buff extreme class movie bosses characters. The only issue is, in my opinion, is with the Exploding Rage text right here, because Exploding Rage is not an exclusively extreme class category, right? Not all Exploding Rage characters are extreme class. There are some super class characters in there. You have Gohan Beast, right? You have Super Saiyan Goku. You have these characters that get pissed off. That's how these protagonists gain such an insane amount of power in the show. They just get angry. And so Exploding Rage is not a very rare category to see protagonist or good guy characters on. And that in turn means that you're not only going to be buffing yourself, you're also going to be buffing the enemy, even if it is to a lesser extent. The boss is still going to have an easier time killing you, and you're going to have a harder time killing them. But moving on to the post-transformation version, because there's definitely some justification to be made here, because this, you know, post-transformation, this Broly is insane, like absolutely broken, right? Let's start off with the Ultra Super Attack first now, this time, just to you know, kind of mix things up. Gigantic catastrophe. Sorry, I'm a little. I just woke up. It's crazy. Greatly raises attack and defense for 1 turn and causes mega colossal damage to the enemy. Obviously, this Broly, like I said before, has a massive leaning to performing additional super attacks, and so raising attack and defense for 1 turn makes a lot of sense for the character. The only issue is that if you don't really prepare in advance to build up the character's defense by a lot, then you won't be able to always be so confident in putting the character in the first slot. Obviously, you'll see here that he gets a key plus 6 at attack and defense plus 300% at a base, which is really, really strong. But obviously you won't be able to tank a lot of these harder hitting super attacks that are hitting for like 3 million or stuff, 3 million, 2 million. Like, sometimes it works, sometimes he can clutch up, but that's not always the case. He also guards all attacks, even like pre-transformation, but post-transformation as well. And on top of that, he has that damage reduction there, 26%, which I guess is pretty good while his domain is active. But again, it does screw other characters over who are also on his team. He might be fine, he may be able to tank the hits, but his allies, you can't exactly make that same guarantee. He gets additional defense when receiving an attack, and he just does super attacks very easily. He not super attack, he does like additional super attacks very easily. So many conditions here that allow him to do so, and for it to activate even like outside of the hidden potential system. And so yeah, I guess now it's time we make the comparison between the two characters. If you want my opinion on the character, I think it's definitely a lot more complicated. But you know, as much as much as I do think Broly does have some, in terms of like raw strength, right? In terms of pure damage, I think Broly definitely gets the win. In terms of defensive power, I think Gogeta is definitely better. Now, in terms of mechanics overall, I'm also going to be giving it to Gogeta, simply because post-transformation, the character is really, really strong, even if he isn't the best when you compare him to a lot of the other superheroes characters that you may see him on, like I see him on the same team with, right? You look at 6th anniversary characters, right? UI Goku and Super Saiyan Blue Evolution Vegeta, post EZA, they're obviously better than this guy. And then you look at a character like Gohan Beast, who's going to be releasing for part 2, and obviously those characters are leagues above this Gogeta. And that, in turn, it definitely does mean that he's not the best, but just because you're the 5th best character in the game doesn't mean you're not good. And I think that's definitely a point to be made. Obviously, him having that taunt with the ability to dodge, it has the potential to age very well, especially with the counter as well. And so that, I think, definitely is a point of interest for me. It's a character who can balance offense and defense very well, and that's something that you really need, because a lot of these fights don't require you to do raw damage like Broly. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you can kind of like speed run the fight, but it's extremely risky and it rarely works. But you can see a lot of like videos on YouTube, especially shorts, where, you know, Broly just does a ton of damage and just nukes the final phase of the boss. Post-transformation, that's obviously where the character comes in. And yeah, I mean, you can't exactly deny that aspect of the character, but a lot of times you're going to be looking more for balance. You're going to be looking more for moderation in terms of both attack and defense, which is why mechanics-wise, I do think Gogeta is better. Now, in terms of value, right? What do I mean by value? How likely is the character to be able to earn you Dragon Stones back, to clear missions, to do all of these things, to get you better, not necessarily better items. It's more to like get like titles and stuff like that, to clear missions basically. I do think it's a much more nuanced question, because the thing about Gogeta is that there are so many superheroes characters, and maybe not all of them are physical, but you don't really necessarily need him, because there are just so many options for his teams. Whereas with Broly, now in the Japanese version of the game, you have AGL LR Jiren, who I do think is better than this Broly. So if you're gonna make the argument that Broly is the best extreme AGL character, I wouldn't exactly agree. In the global version, yeah, sure. But if you're talking about like the game as a whole, I think I would definitely give it to Jiren more. But as of right now, in terms of value, I do think that Broly is better, simply because he has the ability to clear extreme class missions and just be able to offer that damage dealing role for super bosses as a team. I think that is definitely something worth highlighting, simply because we haven't actually seen a lot of that in the global version of the game. Later down the line, we're obviously going to get Jiren, like I said before, who's going to outclass this Broly, basically. And so I guess this guy's value is going to run short. And as a Dokkan Fest character, you're going to be summoning a lot more on those red coin banners, and if you've been saving coins, when a Dokkan Fest banner comes back and he shows up on the coins, you can actually just buy him. Whereas Gogeta is a carnival character, so if you're talking about like summons, I do think summoning on Gogeta definitely has a higher level of urgency to it, simply because I don't really summon on carnival banners a lot. And so what that means is I don't have a lot of coins saved up, and I don't think that just applies to me alone. I think a lot of people definitely lean more towards that Dokkan Festival banner, just because it's better in terms of like the characters that feature on it. And so that being a point of discussion, you can start to see why a lot of people, why I do think it is strange people summon on Broly, when you can just save red coins and exchange them later down the line. But in terms of value, it's undeniable that Broly does help you clear extreme class missions, super bosses missions, a bunch of these other missions that can get you Dragon Stones back. And so that gives the character value, because after summoning for him, you can essentially get some of your money back, even if it's not all of it. And the reason I made this video is obviously, again, one of the reasons is because I want to make it like a series, and as a formality, I do want to start off with part 1 of the 9th anniversary. But another thing is because a lot of people in my previous videos on Dokkan Battle, well, one specific one, obviously, the one with like way more views than everything else, a lot of people pointed out that value of Broly. A lot of people talked about it in the comment section. They discussed about how, you know, this Broly is really good. And he isn't. The whole point of discussion in the game isn't necessarily just about the character's mechanics, how good they are in the fight, but also how much value they bring to the table for your account. And I think that is definitely something I kind of forgot to highlight in that previous video, that I do think is worth putting a larger emphasis on right now in this video. But yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what you think about my take. Is it very like lukewarm? Is it like very cold even? Or do you think that I'm going a little too far, talking about how Gogeta is just better in terms of defense and mechanics? Let me know in the comments. If you have any additional criticism, leave it down below in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you, just because, you know, it helps me improve as a small content creator. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe to see future videos as they come out, and, you know, just to make sure that you're notified. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this video. Bye, thanks for watching.